Hello, Internet. Gino, that Pinguino Greco here again with another episode of Deep Listens. And today is a bonus podcast, which means that we are discussing stuff that is not on our normally scheduled podcast schedule.
It's like that weird part of YouTube you go like late at night and it's on autoplay.
Oh no, now it's just unbaggings of people's groceries. What a nightmare. But instead of unbaggings of people's groceries, we're instead going to discuss Magic the Gathering and the latest set that came out. It's basically the same.
It's like that, or watch people like saw through random household objects.
Yes. With like a water cannon in hyper slow-mo.
Yeah.
So
that part of YouTube.
We're going to be discussing Aether Revolt, or Aether Revolt. It's Aether.
Aether.
I know that's how they pronounce it, but there's an A in front of the E, and it makes me mad. And if we're going to kind of just jump into a bunch of Magic-related topics, so if you have no familiarity with the trading card game, the first trading card game, Magic the Gathering, we did do another podcast on Magic the Gathering on Kaladesh, and we did a little bit more introing of Magic, just like regular breakdowns of the game itself. So if you need that background, you might want to give that podcast a listen. But honestly, we're probably not the resource for learning Magic. We just happen to play it and enjoy it. So sometimes, we like to get together and talk about a game we enjoy on this podcast about video games. And I am joined, as always, by Billy Jeskai Rothert.
If I had to pick a Magic the Gathering color archetype, it would be Jeskai. I play so much blue, red, white, probably in that order, that it has to describe me perfectly.
And we are joined also by another one of our Magic playing friends, Devin. I don't know what guild. What do you line with? Simic?
He's definitely
Simic
Abzan.
Just all the blue ones.
But it's like if you took blues spikiness and like control, but with Jun's like just attrition and value. Like you had to just mix those two things. So
I really just want to be Sultai.
Yeah, I was gonna
say. I want to be Sultai.
Sounds like Devin's Sultai DiFrancesco.
Yeah, Devin's Sultai DiFrancesco.
Or Esper.
Anyway, it's great to be here and talking to the Deep Listens listeners. Just great alliteration there, I guess.
The deep listeners.
Deep listeners, that's good.
And we are, I guess for me, I would probably be Teamer. Teamer or just Is It, and just get rid of the other colors. Who cares? But we're going to discuss Aether Revolt, the new set that's come out. And before we do that, do we want to go into Aether Revolt stuff, or just discuss the new Standard bannings? So if you're not familiar with Standard, it is the most popular form of constructed Magic. It is what most people play after they, are outside of Limited.
After they graduate from the kitchen table.
Yes, after they graduate from the kitchen table, they stumble drunkenly into a local game store and say, what's the least I have to spend to play a game? And then they say, play Standard, here's a pre-constructed deck. And then they lose. And then one day they come back and they've made their own deck, or they've looked on the internet, and then they have a deck that doesn't immediately lose.
After losing many times, they form a spiky outer covering.
Yes. And they realize that their dreams are not what's important. Winning is what's important.
Winning is the only thing that matters.
And so it looks like in Standard, people are going to be winning a whole bunch of different ways now. Because they banned 3 of the most popular cards in 3 of the most popular archetypes.
They basically just really... I actually read... Did you read Sam Stoddard's article, Gino?
No, I did not.
So Sam Stoddard, a MTG designer... I guess actually, let me take that back. He's actually a developer. In MTG, a developer versus a designer is pretty different. Probably shouldn't go into it right now, though.
Yeah, design is the people who actually make the cards. Development are the people who play test them to make sure that they're not broken.
Yes. So Sam Stoddard said that, for one, he said that they deeply looked into banning collected company, which I didn't realize before. I knew that it was, it had a big flag on it, red flag, but I didn't realize they were like deeply, deeply considering banning it.
They should have. It would have made
Yeah,
Standard better if they banned that boogeyman.
they basically said they wish they had found a good window, and they had the data showing that it kind of need to be banned, but they like to ban things. It's kind of lame, but they pretty much said they're pretty interested in banning things around Pro Tours. Like they kind of want to ban it and then have a Pro Tour to kind of test out the post-ban standard. And because of the timing of the modern Pro Tour, they never saw a good window to do that with Collected Company. But
Yeah,
let's actually say the 3 cards that were banned.
Sure. The 3 cards that were banned were Emrakul the Promised End, Smuggler's Copter, and Reflector Mage. Each of these cards did something either annoying or degenerate, or format altering, or all of those things at the same time.
Yeah.
So the easiest ban to understand, I think, is Emrakul. As someone who played a lot of Emrakul, and she was in, I think, every standard deck, almost every standard deck I made for the last 3 months or 4 months. Makes sense. That card it's the period at the end of just about, like 50 to 60 or 70% of the metagame's strategy. Like, the two of the 3 most powerful decks are Green-Black Delirium, and their goal is to basically power out a super early cheap Emrakul and then recur it if it dies. And then Aetherworks Marvel, just all the different flavors of Aetherworks Marvel that were just trying to cheat out Emrakul on turn 4. And that was basically what they were trying to do.
Before we move on to the next card, I'd just like to briefly, Gino and I talked about this briefly before, briefly discuss whether or not Emrakul has always been broken, or whether it was broken in Kaladesh when Aetherworks Marvel was printed that let it come out relatively easily on turn 4. I, as the deep listeners now know, have a soft spot in my heart for Sultai, and Green-Black Delirium just does everything that I want to do in Magic. It's value, it's messing with graveyard stuff, the creatures are big and efficient and do cool things, and we have removal. It's just kind of everything I want to do in Standard Magic. And Legacy, I'll play Charlotte's Agents in my Sultai deck, but that's not what Standard's all about. I thought Emrakul the Promised End was pretty reasonable, strong, but pretty reasonable in Green-Black Delirium, and Aetherworks Marvel really was the card that sent, and Emrakul the Promised End kind of just ate shit for Aetherworks Marvel's sends.
I disagree, because I found the problem is not necessarily that Emrakul is way too powerful in Green-Black Delirium. It's that the presence of Emrakul means that every other card that is between the costs of 5 and 13 basically have to be better than Emrakul to even be playable. The only card that really bucks that trend was Avacyn, Archangel Avacyn, who has Flash, and who, she slices, she dices, she does a whole lot of nasty things. She's probably she was like the second strongest creature next to Emrakul, or close to it. She's in the running for strongest creature in Standard. And so if you weren't doing that, Emrakul, you had to explain, why the hell am I not just playing a 13/13 flying, trampling, protection from instants, Mindslaver my opponent, that usually costs right around, anywhere from 10 to 6 to 10 or 7 to 10 on a regular basis. If you're playing normal Magic, it costs 10. If you're trying even a little bit, it costs 8. And if you're trying real hard, it costs 6, which is stupid, or 7. Either way, it's stupid. And just the mere presence of that card meant that a whole host of other cool cards just couldn't be played. Like Verduous Gearhulk is a card that is very strong. It's a 5 mana. It is 5 mana, 8/8 basically, trample, and 4 of its 8 power can have haste and be spread across multiple bodies. However, 8 is less than 13, and so it was very hard to play that card. The only cards really that got played that cost more than 4 and were creatures were Ishkana, which just is the speed bump that decks would use to get to Emrakul. Torrential Gear Hulk, which has flash and basically just flashes back powerful spells for free, and then Avacyn. So there's a bunch of powerful cards that just were chased out of the format by Emrakul's presence, and it's just super unfun to get Mindslavered and have all of your spells turned against your opponent, turned against yourself.
I think it's unfun anytime that your opponent says, you don't get to play the game. I'm the only one who gets to play the game. You get to sit there for 2 minutes while I take your turn, and then you get to take your turn after I've ruined your whole game.
As someone who has done that and had it done to me, there's nothing worse than drawing a card that's useful and then knowing, oh, that's not going to be in my hand. Yeah, so I completely understand why that card was banned. It was super format warping. A lot of the answers to it were so expensive and narrow that it made you vulnerable to just about everything else. It's, shame. I had fun playing Emrakul, but if I had to play Emrakul for another year, I have a feeling it'd get real old real quick.
Another thing, we actually touched upon this in our last MTG podcast. We talked about how there were fewer safety valves in Kaladesh. I haven't looked enough at the spoiler for Aether Revolt to see their stance on safety valves, but I do have to wonder if one reason why Emrakul the Promised End had to be banned was because they did not put a strong graveyard safety valve into Standard. If for those who don't know, the way Emrakul costs less than 13 is by graveyard. So maybe if there had been a way to hate. Yes. Aetherworks Marvel or messing with the graveyard. And so maybe if there had been a strong graveyard safety valve, Emrakul wouldn't have been as much of a problem.
Sure, but if you throw in a strong graveyard safety valve, the splash damage onto all of the fun, semi-degenerate but ultimately harmless graveyard decks they'd get caught in the crossfire to make a 13/13 cost 13 mana. And I think, if anything, this format has kind of proven that even Green-Black Delirium, as powerful as it is not broken in such a way that it needs to be hosed with this, you don't need to print Tormod's Crypt or something that just eats it alive. Those decks get a lot of value, but they are not degenerate. The problem is when people start dropping 13/13s on turn 4 or turn 6 and then just keep dropping it over and over again for very cheap. You shouldn't get to play a 13/13 and then a kill spell on the same turn.
Yeah, let's handle the next card, I guess.
Yep, next card is Smuggler's Copter. This card's cardinal sin is it is basically the most efficient thing any aggressive deck can do at 2 mana.
Yeah, the fact that this card is colorless is probably the main reason it had to be banned. Just the fact that almost any aggressive mid-range to complete aggressive hyper aggro deck can play this. I mean, this card fits into white-blue flash and also black-red zombies, and just
fits into Delirium because you can throw stuff into your graveyard with it.
You could play it in Delirium if you felt like it. You can play it just about anywhere. I played it in a Marvel deck. As in place of cards like Cathartic Reunion to just filter cards. I won a game that I was up against an opponent who had 17 main deck hate cards, and I won it on the back of Smuggler's Copter. I had no reason to be in that game. Just because I drew 3 Smuggler's Copters, they lost.
Yeah, Smuggler's Copter is a brutally efficient card. I do wonder if it would have been banned if they hadn't just seen that Emrakul had to be banned. I think it might have been it's too hard to say, and there's no reason to speculate, but I do think there is a possibility that Smuggler's Copter wouldn't have been so egregious that it had to be banned if they weren't already banning Emrakul the Promised End. I think that a lot of this banning, it wasn't that any card besides Emrakul had to be banned, but to keep the format. It's kind of like all these cards were strong enough to compete with Emrakul, and the only way, if you just ban Emrakul, these cards take over, but these cards hadn't really taken over previously. But if we take Emrakul out, which kills all the other decks, the Smuggler's Copter decks just would take over the field.
Yeah, and my big thing is just with Smuggler's Copter, I think that the checks for that card were in Aether Revolt. Like, there are some pretty natural checks to that card, but the main problem is just that it is so brutally efficient that if you're playing something else, another vehicle, there's no other vehicle that you can play that does what Smuggler's Copter does. It's just so brutally efficient that you're better off just hoping they don't have the answer because it's so good at what it does. Like, there's even some of the vehicles that challenge it in terms of power level, like Heart of Kirin, which I think is probably one of the most powerful cards in the new set. It's same cost as Smuggler's Copter, but it's a 4/4 with Vigilance instead of a 3/3 with Looting, and it's got a higher crew cost, but it also can be crewed by Planeswalkers, basically. But that means that with the higher crew cost, you can't just go turn 1 Thraben Inspector, turn 2 Smuggler's Copter, and just get them. You have to actually work for it a little bit, which means the red-white vehicles deck has some creatures with power 3, and they can actually crew Heart of Kirin because it's got a crew cost of 3. But like white-blue Flash does not have a 3-power creature to crew that thing. They'll need to wait till a Planeswalker comes down, or they'll need to start changing the cards they play. The problem with Smuggler's Copter was both of those decks got to use it with no deck building cost at all. And so some of the cards that are coming in are similarly powerful, but they are not as inexpensive in terms of deck building. So yeah, you start to define these decks more. They need to make considerations instead of just going, well, I'll add 4 of this card because it's just the best card.
Yeah, it would have been really interesting to see if the power of Heart of Kirin, by just being a little bit bigger than Smuggler's Copter, and the power of Fatal Push, which is an instant speed answer to Smuggler's Copter for just 1 singular black mana. It really would have been interesting to see if that would have been enough to end Smuggler's Copter's reign, but we'll never know, and I think Smuggler's Copter was definitely ban-worthy.
Yeah, and even if those cards were strong enough to stop Smuggler's Copter from just bashing people's faces in on turn 3, it would not stop it from just sculpting your hand through looting. It still was just so damn efficient at doing all the things an aggressive deck wanted to do. You know, you were okay. Sometimes you were okay with it dying just because it looted for you twice, which is, if you're a green aggro deck, that you shouldn't have a 3/3 flyer that's fixing your hand. That just shouldn't be. And
yeah.
Then the last card is Reflector Mage.
I feel like of all the bans, this is definitely the most eyebrow-raising one. The last 2 cards were a mythic and a rare. They were massive. They were splashy. Upon reading them, the power of them was just self-evident. While Reflector's Mage is certainly strong, certainly powerful, it doesn't jump off the page like any of the last 2 cards did.
So I would agree, because the most that I played Reflector Mage was in Magic Duels, the Steam version of this game, and I recognize that it was pretty solid. I played it in a Bant deck in that game, and I recognized what it did. It contributed a ton to the tempo of the game, and if they were running a specific set of creatures that you were worried about, it could its bounce effect said that you can't cast that card or cards with that name on your next turn, so it could sometimes make a second dead card in the player's hand. But nothing that we've said so far makes it particularly ban-worthy. In isolation, I think that they just took out this card so that it would make the decks that it goes in slightly worse. It's not that Reflector Mage itself was the problem. It's that they just wanted to weaken a deck style, not say this card was too good.
Well, I don't think that, and I listen to the Top Level podcast with Patrick Chapin and Mike Flores, so this is a little bit coming from listening to them, but I think the most compelling argument I've heard for why you ban Reflector Mage is not that, like you said, it is not the most devastatingly powerful card. It is not running roughshod over standard. However, it is a profoundly annoying card. And it punishes, the type of magic that it punishes is the type of magic that Wizards wants you to play, where you are playing progressively bigger creatures, playing an interactive game, both players kind of slowly adding to the board. Reflector Mage punishes you for playing creatures that are higher than 4 mana, basically, that don't have flash. It punishes you for playing a lot of the big dumb beaters like Virtuous Gearhulk that, like Emrakul said, hey, if you're playing one of these cards, it has to deal with me. Reflector Mage is like, well, if you're playing one of these cards, you have to be okay with losing it for 2 turns, for a full turn cycle. And that's pretty powerful, and it hamstrings certain powerful cards just by its mere existence. And so having this uncommon from a year ago, basically making it so all of your mid-range cards just are worse, I understand why you get rid of that. Especially because you can't get the tempo back from that thing. The tempo swing is so huge. It's just such a natural... It's also great with a merge. It's got a lot of great synergies. So, and its body is relevant, too. Weirdly enough.
Think... Yeah, it's... The things that you said are true, but Devin and I were talking about this just, like shooting the breeze a couple days ago about Magic stuff when he told me that we had these 3 bans. And one thing that we discussed together was that if the deck that plays Reflector Mage was really strong, Reflector Mage did play a part in it, but not the only part. And there were probably stronger parts of that deck that you could have banned. I think they didn't do it because, and this is what Devin and I talked about, they didn't do it because this is probably like the least, like of all the things you could ban out of this deck, losing Reflector probably ruins that deck the least, but still gives it like a little nerf.
Yeah, it ruins it the least, and also it removes its least interactive part.
Like maybe like its most unfun part.
Yes, it takes this card that just occasionally gets you free wins by tempoing someone horribly out of the game.
Because when I first heard of it, I was thinking like, okay, you're gonna ban a 3 mana card. Sorry, yeah, it's a 3 mana 2/3 that does something cool when it enters the battlefield, and its colors are white and blue. I was like, oh, Spell Queller. Oh no, not Spell Queller getting banned. No, Reflector Mage. That's like my first reaction.
Yeah, and
go
ahead, Devin.
I definitely think it was a matter of. I legitimately think this was a Wizards looked at the cards, as we talked about, that could be banned out of White Blue Flash. They wanted to weaken kind of all the pre-existing archetypes prior to this banning. They wanted to weaken Green Black Delirium. They wanted to weaken all the Aetherworks Marvel decks. They wanted to weaken the aggro decks and aggressive mid-range decks playing Smuggler's Copter. And then they felt White Blue Flash. I think they said there was some data showing that White Blue Flash was actually the best deck in the format. I don't know if that's true, but I think Wizards has claimed that their data shows that White Blue Flash is the best deck in the format, and they wanted to weaken that deck as well if they're going to weaken everything else, so White Blue Flash doesn't just demolish everything. If they supposedly have this data that that is the maybe like in a vacuum strongest deck in the format, so they just wanted to ban another card out, White Blue Flash, and they looked at it and they said, we could ban Avacyn, we could ban Spell Queller, we could ban Reflector Mage. Those are probably the 3. I guess they could also ban Gideon. And
Gideon takes a whole lot of decks down with him. You can't have green-white tokens. You get rid of him, it gets rid of a lot of things. Get rid of Avacyn, same thing. Like, there are other decks that get caught in the splash damage. Reflector Mage just hurts Blue-White Flash, and Spell Queller, I think in the coming standard, we're going to appreciate having a thing that can counter 4 mana and 3 mana spells reactively. I think we're going to come to appreciate that.
I definitely think it was, honestly, I believe a big factor was Reflector Mage was coming out of standard soon anyway. I think Reflector Mage would be leaving when the next set, I believe, Monquette.
No, not anymore. They leave at the same time.
Oh.
Reflector Mage and Spell Queller. They changed the ban list back to the old timing. So those two are leaving together. But the thing is, one of these can counter an Aetherworks Marvel, and can counter a Panharmonicon, and can counter a Saheeli Rai, or a Felidar Guardian. It can counter basically all of the combo pieces in the coming standard. And that is a important check that should exist in a standard format where there's a lot of comboing going on, you probably want a strong counterspell or a creature that acts like a counterspell.
After our last, I believe, important point, we should handle Aether Revolt as a set, but Gino did just reference another very important thing I think we need to talk about.
I mean, let's talk about it after we talk about Aether Revolt, because the coming standard is something I want to talk about a whole bunch. So let's just, real quick, Aether Revolt, it's coming out on the 20th, or 19th, next week. By the time you're listening to this, it will be out like this Friday. So this new set, it is the follow-up to Kaladesh. It carries over a few key mechanics, energy, and vehicles. So vehicles are artifacts that your creatures can drive. You can drive them around.
Vroom vroom.
Vroom vroom. Once we've discussed it a little bit in our Kaladesh podcast. The mechanics are basically the same. There are a few other vehicles that are a little bit more out there, a little bit more interesting, a little bit more experimental. Like there's a one
just
mana.
Heart of Kieran.
Yeah, Heart of Kieran's really strong. The 1 mana 7/10, is it, or a 7/11?
I think it's a 7/11. Let me fact check that.
That thing's real fun. Crew 6. What a dumb card that is. And then you've got other crazy stuff going on.
It's a 7/11. It is another Dreadnought. It's definitely referencing the old Dreadnought. I can't remember what the name of that card is, but it had a similar. It was 1 mana, and you had to sacrifice a bunch of stuff. It's basically just a reference to the old card that I believe also had the word Dreadnought in its name.
There's Phyrexian Dreadnought. Which is just a cumulative upkeep of sacrifice a creature, and it's like a 2 mana 10/10 or something huge. But the vehicles, we went over it. There's not too much to explain other than specific vehicles that are strong. Energy, similarly, energy is still in this set. Carryover from Kaladesh. You can kind of use energy as this extra resource that can be, you as a player kind of have, and you can distribute across different cards to power them up for additional effects. Energy, again, pretty much the same as works the same as Kaladesh. There are different cards that make energy and different cards that consume them, but otherwise you're treating it like the same mechanic. There's nothing too crazy going on. So let's move on to the new mechanics of Aether Revolt. First one, Revolt. Fitting name.
Shocker.
Yes.
Yeah, in a set that's all about the rebels basically taking on the Empire, the consulate that is controlling them. It makes a lot of sense that we have this mechanic that is referencing the struggle between that the rebels are fighting against the consulate. I really like the flavor, and I haven't gotten a chance to play with it yet, but Gino will tell us all about how Revolt plays out after he tells us what it does.
Yeah, sure. So how Revolt works is when a card you control, when a permanent you control, every card with Revolt has basically a trigger that happens when you cast. It just says, like, I have a trigger. At some point, if a permanent left your control during your turn, or left the battlefield during your turn, Revolt happens. This ability happens. It's an ability word, so the specific thing that happens is different depending on which card you're talking about, which means it's kind of hard to talk about Revolt. Revolt is just like, if a permanent left the battlefield, if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn, Revolt. So some cards, for example, when they enter the battlefield, if a permanent left your side of the battlefield this turn, they get like a +1/+1 counter. Or some of them at the end of your turn, if you lost a permanent, you get maybe a 1/1 servo. And so the benefits are very different depending on what cards. And in terms of triggering Revolt, you've got a couple different ways to do it. You can treat it like Morbid. You can just run a creature into a battle and have it die. That's the easiest way. That's what you're going to do probably, a good 70% of the time is just, I'm going to run my 1/1 into their 2/2 and hope that they block it. They did, and now I get a sick bonus. other main ways, you can flicker your cards. You can bounce your own cards. That's something that white and blue do a whole heck of a lot. Is just it's a carryover of their theme from Kaladesh.
You can kill your own stuff for the value.
You can do that, or you can just bounce it back to your hand, or you can play a card that makes it leave the battlefield and come back immediately.
Or you can be meta and kill your own stuff.
I have done that. That works to trigger Revolt. It's it's an expert level play. I wouldn't make that all the time. It's not always the right thing to do. Sometimes you don't want to kill your creature so that you get an extra +1/+1 counter.
Sometimes it's what you need, Gino.
It's always the right thing to do for the story.
Even though for the value, you should probably do it. So having played it, I played in 2 pre-releases, and for me, I found in Limited, Revolt is a really fun mechanic. It changes the implications of every combat so radically when you have cards with Revolt, because all of a sudden you're incentivized in such a different way than you normally are. Like, I was just doing chump attacks all day because I had a Revolt card in my hand, and I was like, well, either they're going to block this thing and it's going to die and I'm going to get my trigger, or they're going to assume I have a Revolt thing and I'm just going to get free damage I shouldn't get. Or if I have a combat trick in my hand, am I bluffing? Am I trying to trigger Revolts? Am I representing a combat trick? Or am I trying to chump attack and I have nothing? And so you have this kind of bluffing game that you get to do every single time you attack. It reminds me a whole heck of a lot of Morph in Cons, where you were kind of always attacking with this 2/2, but there's always an implied threat that it could be something much bigger and much more dangerous, but your opponent never really knew how to react to it, how they should treat that card. And now it's just kind of applying, instead of the card itself being the threat, your little weenies are suddenly an implied threat of something in your hand being devastating, which is really cool. It's a fun mechanic. And some of the cards with Revolt are just devastatingly powerful if you can turn them on. Like Fatal Push. 1 mana, destroy a card with a creature with converted mana cost 4 or less is pretty dang powerful. There's a bunch of kind of powerful Revolt cards, and if you can get the engine going, it really pays off.
So one thing I want to talk about briefly is it's pretty clear that for a card such as Vengeful Rebel, which is a 3-mana 3/2, that when you get Revolt off, you get to give a target creature -3/-3. Being able to just play a 3-mana 3/2, which already isn't far off of the vanilla test, and also getting to almost certainly kill one of your opponent's decent creatures with -3/-3, and that's a huge effect. Obviously, almost every deck is going to play that card, just because worst case scenario it's a 3-mana 3/2, and best case scenario it's an insane, absurd card.
Best case scenario, it's Necrotol, but bigger.
Yeah. First strike, that's an important part of Necrotol. But what I really want to know was
pretty good too.
It's true. Are we playing, from your experience, are people just kind of going all in on Revolt? Like, they have a Revolt deck. They are playing mediocre Revolt cards because they just have tons of ways to trigger Revolt. They're just all about revolting. They are just angry rebels who want to stick it to the consulate.
No. How you play Revolt, from my experience, is you are playing an aggressive deck or a blink deck, and the Revolt cards are extra incentive for you to be doing those things. Revolt is best when it is hiding in an aggressive deck, because then you're just behaving a way an aggressive deck wants to behave, and sometimes you just blow people the heck out. Like, for example, in the pre-release, I had this sequence. I had a 2/1 and a 1/1 servo. I swung the 1/1 servo into a 3/3. They blocked it. They also killed my 2/1. I played... what is the name of the card? It's the white-blue multicolor... the white-green multicolor card. What is that dude's name?
Oh, it's...
Renegade Rallier.
Yep, that's it.
So what I did was I played Srom's Expertise. That gave me 3 1/1 servos. I used the expertise to play Renegade Rallier for free, trigger Revolt, get back my 2/1 from the graveyard, and I went from having an empty board to having 5 creatures for 4 mana.
So it definitely sounds like, from what you're saying, you're when you're building a deck with Revolt in mind, the idea isn't to build Revolt.deck. It's more of you're an aggressive strategy or a strategy that really is incorporating blinking for other reasons. The Revolt is just some cool icing on the cake that you might be able to trigger, hopefully.
Yeah, if you've got a lot of sack outlets, if you've got blink outlets, if you've got just running dudes into things, all of those things will just trigger Revolt, and it's just like it's because the trigger is so different depending on what card you're playing. You know, you can't really rely on the Revolt cards being especially cohesive. Not all Revolt cards even play well together. You're triggering them the same way, but they don't necessarily achieve the same goal. So you really want to just analyze them in one at a time. Like,
before we move on away from Revolt, I do think we should briefly touch on the power of Fatal Push. Fatal Push is one single black mana. It lets you at instant speed destroy a creature with CMC 2 or less, and then if you trigger Revolt, it can destroy a creature with CMC 4 or less. The fact that in Modern and in other Eternal formats, Legacy, you can so easily trigger Revolt with fetch lands or other efficient removal like Lightning Bolt. I guess actually that's not really true. You don't really want to bolt your own creature.
That is the type
unless
of
it's
revolt,
for the value.
That is the Revolt triggering that you don't want to do. But I mean, I think it's been said already, but it's the strongest black removal spell ever printed. Other than Dismember, maybe. But Dismember is a colorless removal spell. So
now, Devin, what were you saying in comparison? I think we mentioned just hanging out in the kitchen, a comparison of this card to Path to Exile.
Yeah, so what's a really important aspect of this card, especially in a Modern format, I am more familiar with Modern than Legacy, is that in Modern, you really only had Disfigure, which not that there's anything wrong with the card, but it's just not anywhere near at the same power level as Lightning Bolt and Path to Exile in Modern. So if you're a black deck and you want to run extremely efficient removal in your deck because you're Jund or you're Abzan, you are pretty much you're kind of forced to go into these colors like Jund and Abzan in your black decks to get the most efficient removal. The fact that now you can stay within black to have a 1 mana extremely powerful removal spell instead of having to rely on Lightning Bolt or Path to Exile, I think that's really going to open up black as a color. And Modern especially, I think this really helps a color combination that I have preference towards called Sultai. And now that Sultai has its own powerful 1 mana removal spell, I think it really opens that up as a color wedge.
Yeah, and it also means that now cards like Path won't get leaned on quite as much. You could make a plausible argument in an Abzan deck that you don't play as many Paths.
Yeah, Path has a pretty notable downside of giving your opponent a land. It's not card parity, it is card disadvantage, but the card that you're giving your opponent is a land, which is generally less powerful than, the 5/6 Tarmogoyf that has to go.
Yeah, the thing that had to die. So that is Revolt. It's super powerful. The mechanic itself is not super powerful. It is on some super powerful cards. So you will definitely be seeing it in just about every format that you play in. Get used to it, but it'll only probably be Fatal Push. There'll be a couple in Standard that we'll see play otherwise, but Fatal Push will be seen everywhere. The second mechanic, the second of two new mechanics in Aether Revolt, is Improvise, and this is my favorite mechanic because it is basically Convoke but artifacts. So if you weren't familiar with Convoke, the same thing is true of Improvise. The idea is your artifacts can help you cast your spells, is how they describe it, how the flavor text.
That sexy flavor text.
Well, not flavor, it's the rules text. That's how they explain it. But your artifacts, you can tap your artifacts to basically, instead of producing mana, you reduce the cost of the spell you're playing by 1 colorless for every artifact you tap, which means your artifacts kind of function as pseudo mana rocks. while you have this ability, which there's two ways to analyze this. So one is there are certain cards that just have improvise on them, and you kind of have to evaluate, okay, how much does this card really cost? Because on the card it says 7, but if I have 2 artifacts in play, now it costs 5. Is it reasonable to play it for 5? What would it have to cost for me to feel good about playing this card in my deck, and how regularly would it have to cost that? And then there's cards that kind of, in Standard, give other things improvise, and that's where it gets interesting for deck construction for me. But in Limited specifically, your analysis really skews depending on how regularly you can make these cards cost stupidly small amounts of mana. And yet again, I, in Limited, managed to, in my other pre-release, play a 5/5 that can't be blocked by artifact creatures on turn 4.
A really good
3.
example
Was it 3?
of
It was 4. Yep.
the kind of thing that Gino's talking about is if we look at a pretty simple card that has this mechanic called Bastion Inventor. On its face, it is a 6 mana with 1 blue, 4/4 with hexproof. So if you have to pay 6 mana for a 4/4 with hexproof, that's really not cutting it.
I mean,
That-
it's in the
yeah,
upper
it's not
bound
like
of playable.
abysmal. Yeah, you're right. It is definitely not just like a fail case 15 mana or something like that, which you just literally can never cast. It doesn't do nothing, but you definitely are not putting a 6 mana 4/4 hexproof in your deck on purpose. That's not what this card is supposed to be. So the question is, how reliable can you get this card to cost something like 4 mana? At 4 mana,
At 5, it's completely respectable. At
Yeah,
4,
it's
it's insane.
and if you get this thing down to 3 on a turn where you can maybe play this, like maybe on turn 5, you can play this and play a 2-drop. I mean, that's a lot of tempo that you might be able to drop on your opponent. I just think that's a card that looks pretty simple on its face. In truth, it actually only has 2 like meaningful rules cards. It just has 2 words, improvise and hexproof, that they have their reminder text, but that's not actually true rules text on the card. It's just the tip. So I mean, this is a card that is pretty simple, that just really shows off the maybe interesting
level of play.
aspects. Yeah, exactly. Level of play that improvise puts on a card.
Yeah, and it, unlike Revolt, improvise is a mechanic that you totally can build a deck around. If you're starting to see a bunch of artifacts ending up in your pool, or seeing them coming around, or cards that make servos, or cards with fabricate, all of a sudden a little bell in your head should go, maybe I should be drafting a handful of improvise cards. Though the fabricate ones will come after. If you've already drafted the improvise cards, then you want to start looking for fabricate cards in your Kaladesh pack. But generally speaking, the more you buy into the improvise mechanic, the more it pays off for you. Because some of these cards just are disgusting when they're played for cheap.
Can I ask something? Now that we have typically 2 sets in a block, how is the drafting going to work? Because I know that before, when we had 3 sets in a block, by the end of it, you would be drafting 1 from each pack. What's the order of the drafting now?
It goes Aether Revolt, Kaladesh.
Okay.
So 2 packs of Aether Revolt, 1 pack of Kaladesh.
You could be looking, like, you could be getting your improvised cards and then be looking for your fabricate in the last pack.
It'll be in that order. So
Has it always been like that for previous sets?
yeah,
This is just how they just basically had to rewrite the rule set for the new 2-block paradigm. We're not going to go into that in this podcast, but the rule set now is first set, obviously just 3 of the first set, and the second set will always be 2 packs of the new set that just came out and 1 pack of the old set.
it's basically ever since Fate Reforged, this has been the way it's done. But one thing to mention just with improvise is that once you've gone heavily into improvise, Gearseeker Serpent is your best friend. That card was already very good, but once you've bought in on a bunch of cards that have pseudo affinity for artifacts, having a card that has actual affinity for artifacts is suddenly really appealing.
Yeah, I actually read when you look at Improvise, it's hard to believe that the developers claim that they actually weren't looking at Convoke when they first came up with the Improvise. That they claim that they were really trying to fit, for some reason, they really wanted affinity in Kaladesh. They thought they could do it right this time. They really thought they could bring affinity back and make it okay. Development basically told design, "What are you doing? Please stop. Don't do this." And then they had to, figure out a new version of affinity that'd be more fun, and they just kind of landed on a different version of Convoke. But I did just want to point out that it wasn't let's do Convoke with artifacts. It was
Affinity.
a soul.
Oh God, affinity. What have we done? Who opened the box? Look, it's running all over the place. Oh God.
Oh,
Yeah.
There's hope. It's Improvise. There it is. In Pandora's box. Thank you for saving us. Improvise/hope.
Yes, and I think that's a good example. That's how I want to go into our standard discussion. Oh God, it's everywhere. What happened? Who let this happen? So
Yeah,
we can
we
can go one of two ways. We can go with the combo of the moment, or the combo that I've been working on personally.
All right, we're gonna skip Gino's combo he's working on personally because we know that that's gonna be his pet. We're gonna talk about a different pet, specifically a pet cat.
Yep, that cat's pretty good. So there is an infinite combo, a turn 4 infinite combo that kills and is unblockable in standard now, or in seems to be standard.
Splinter Twin. Remember how we had to ban that? Let's put it in standard. We banned it at modern. Too good at modern. Needs to be in standard. That's really where it should be.
To be fair, Splinter Twin, half of it had flash and could tap down your lands and made it really inconvenient to deal with. Also, it had all of the modern flash stuff going on. This combo has a much smaller pool of cards to work with, though also it has a lot smaller pool of cards trying to stop it. So we'll see. But the combo is, if you haven't heard the news, there's this planeswalker called Saheeli Rai. She is a red-blue planeswalker. She is an Izzet planeswalker. She has 3 abilities, but the one that matters is her middle ability. Her middle... I'll just say all 3 of them, just so that you have a full view of the card. She starts with 3 loyalty. Her +1 is scry 1, and all your opponents take 1 damage. Her -2 is copy a creature or create a copy of a creature or an artifact you control. That copy is an artifact in addition to its other types, and it gains haste, and exile it at end of turn. And she also has a -7 that allows you to search your library for 3 different artifacts and put them into play. So she was not very good in Kaladesh Standard. I don't think she even saw Fringe play, because cloning a random aggro creature was not what you wanted to do in the land of Smuggler's Copters. Also, playing a 3 loyalty planeswalker on 3 was not a thing you wanted to do in the land of Smuggler's Copters. But with the coming of Aether Revolt, there's this new card called Felidar Guardian, which is a 4 mana, 1 white mana and 3 colorless, or 3 generic mana, for a 1/4 cat beast.
Cat
beast. And when it enters the battlefield, you can exile a permanent you control and then return it into play. Untap. Just then return it to play. So all it does is flicker a thing. But it says permanent, and that's where it gets dangerous, because Saheeli's a permanent. And when you make a copy of the cat beast, it also gets its enter the battlefield trigger, which allows you to go Saheeli. Well, you can do one of the dangerous things about this combo is you can play either card first. But if Felidar's in play first, you can if Saheeli's in play first, she's in play. You play Felidar. Felidar flickers Saheeli. She comes back with 3 loyalty. You minus Saheeli. Create a copy of Felidar. The copy flickers Saheeli. She creates a copy of Felidar, and then it just keeps going until you have infinite cat beasts, and you hit your opponent with all of them.
Importantly, Saheeli's native 2 gives the copy haste.
Yes, the haste is important. And then the other way, if you do it the other way around, Felidar, the beast is in play. You play Saheeli, immediately -2 her. She creates the copy flickers, and it just goes forever. So this is a very powerful and dangerous combo. It's also worth mentioning that you can drop both of them on the same turn, and they will combo out. So if you have 6 mana, you can use the Cat Beast to flicker a land, and then play Saheeli second, and you will combo someone out. You can manage to get counter protection up for some of them. They both play very nicely with other cards that are powerful in the set, like Panharmonicon. Both of them play very nicely with that card already. So it's also in the colors that can best protect it, with blue being one of the necessary colors for the combo. So this combo will be powerful. It will be very present in the first weeks of Standard, I would expect. And I think there are answers to it, but you have to try. You have
I just
to know.
like that right now Jeskai has one of the biggest, dumbest things, and I'm happy.
Yeah, I am really interested to see how this combo shakes out. The internet is abuzz trying to figure out, did Wizards do this on purpose? Did Wizards miss this somehow? Did they see it too late? I am just really curious to see how messed up is this combo.
It's very messed up. I helped my friends test a little bit, and it's very messed up. You can't... I think something that's more useful than talking about how messed up it is maybe, for the people who are listening and who actually play Magic, maybe we should just go over a list of the cards that actually answer this combo, because one of them better be in your deck. If you're going to just sit there, and you're not going to outrun it, let me tell you that. You're not going to get faster than turn 4 to kill them. It's almost not... The decks that play this combo play a lot of removal on top of it so that you cannot outrun them. So you'd better hope that they either stumble and not hit the combo. You can hope that they just don't have it. But otherwise, you'd better have a way to stop it. And some of the cards that spring to mind...
Negate.
Negate stops half of the combo. I'm thinking more of cards that either stop both halves of the combo or stop the Guardian, because the Guardian comes down second, generally speaking, just because it costs 4. Saheeli, the timing to hit Saheeli is just so hard that, generally speaking, you have a better chance killing her than countering her straight up or something like that, or answering her with a Ruinous Path.
I do believe a shock in response to her -2 will just end Saheeli's miserable life.
Yes, shock is a good answer, because it answers when they're trying to go off. It will answer it, generally speaking. Fatal Push with Revolt will kill the Guardian in response to either its Flicker trigger or in response to the -2 from Saheeli. So that works. Metallic Rebuff. Not Rebuff. Metallic... Is it? Rebuke. Metallic Rebuke. That answers it pretty cleanly. It's basically Mana Leak with Improvise. So it's a 3-mana Mana Leak with Improvise. That can answer either side of the combo depending on what kind of artifact you're playing to power it up. Revolutionary Rebuff counters it. It's not a great counterspell, but it counters both halves of the combo early and reliably. You can also play Warping Whale. That's a card that people have forgotten about, but it exiles the Guardian. It will exile it in response to whatever you need to respond to. And I think those are the cards that have sprung to mind as good answers to this. Grasp of Darkness is another good one. Unlicensed Disintegration is a good one. Murder is a good one.
I'm always a fan of Murder.
Always a fan of Murder. You can also just play some of the straight counterspells like Negate or Disallow, Scatter to the Winds. Those sorts of cards are fine, but I feel like the timing there can be a little bit iffy. One of the things that I don't think you want to do to combat this is play something like Ruinous Path or Quarantine Field. Slow answers to Planeswalkers. Sorcery speed answers are just not where you want to be with this combo.
against planeswalkers, slow answers are usually not answers.
Well, they're usually, because planeswalkers slowly accrue value, you can usually live with them answering one, using their ability once. That's fine. The problem is this combo can happen all in one turn and kill you, and you just never get the turn cycle to stop it. So, like, for example, Saheeli Rai, if you drop Felidar and Saheeli on turn 6 with 6 mana up, there is no turn to Ruinous Path it. There is no opportunity to stop it. Oh, Spell Snare is another... Stasis Snare is another good one. Another good answer. Brutal Expulsion, honestly, is another surprisingly decent answer. But those are all cards that you should be looking at very strongly. So the combo, the thing that I've been working on personally is Inspiring Statuary. Devin, do you want to talk about that card a little bit? Do you know anything?
No, you can go. No, I have not, I've honestly been a little not as on top of it.
Yeah,
so I'd love to hear all about it.
It's a 3-mana artifact that gives all of your non-artifacts improvise. It gives them all improvise, which is it's basically affinity. Improvise is like a watered-down version of affinity, and giving a bunch of things affinity for artifacts is pretty dangerous. And there's this tribe that's pretty powerful. It's in Standard. You've seen it in Modern. You've seen it in Legacy. It's called Eldrazi. They are colorless, and many of them have no colored mana symbols at all in their costs. So I think the non-artifact clause in Inspiring Statuary is to stop you from just blasting down artifacts, but Eldrazi you can just kind of blast down because their costs can be completely paid with improvise, depending on which one you're playing. So what I've been experimenting with is kind of the Cheerios deck from earlier Standard, which played a bunch of 0-mana equipment and then tried to combo out using Aetherflux Reservoir, just by dropping equipments all one after another. But I think that combo is very clunky. What I'd rather do is use those 0-mana artifacts to be 0-mana mana accelerants, and then play Thought-Knot Seers and Reality Smashers and Ulamogs for very cheap. And so it's not necessarily a combo so much as you can play Metallic Rebuff for 1 on turn 1 if you want to, which is a really good way to answer some of the degenerate combos that are running around. But also, when you get Inspiring Statuary into play, all of a sudden these incredibly powerful, valuable creatures just are super cheap. They're pretty fair, but they just go way over the top of everything else. They are already undercosted, so when you make them even more undercosted, it's really scary. And that's, I think, what we learned with Modern Eldrazi, right? Was a Thought-Knot Seer is pretty good at 4, but when it's 2, it's messed up. And you can make it cost 2 again. So that,
yeah, I'm definitely excited to see if anyone finds a way to have a consistent deck that does something broken with Inspiring Statuary.
Yeah, and that's where I'm experimenting right now, is just playing with Eldrazi and that. Because I think that we have an example just from Modern and from Legacy that if you can make those cards cost even slightly less, they are good enough to hang with just about anything Magic is capable of producing. Which, at Standard, is a much smaller card pool. So we'll see. But let's go over some of the other heavy hitters of the set for Standard purposes, because that's the format that most of us play. Devin, you wanted to go over the Expertise Cycle?
Yep. The Expertise Cycle is a card for each color that it costs some amount of mana. I think it ranges from 3 to 6, and each card does a effect that's maybe just a little bit overcosted for that amount of mana, but then for free you can pick another card in your hand and that's 1 mana cost less and play it for free. So probably the most splashy of these effects is Yahini's expertise. I might be butchering that name.
Yeheni is how I pronounce it.
Yahini.
That's how I pronounce
Yahini's
it.
expertise. It's black, black 2. All creatures get -3, -3, and then after the -3, -3 effect happens, you can cast a card with CMC 3 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. I mean, that's a pretty powerful play pattern. You kill a lot of your opponent's things, maybe 1 or 2 of yours, just kind of depending on how the board state looks, and then your tempo loss is negligible because you get to play a card that's 3 mana to get back on the board. One of the problems with board wipes is that they do a bunch of damage to your opponent's side, but then they get to reload, they get to reset the board after you've tapped all your mana, so you're kind of again in a spot where you are down in tempo. This card does not cost any tempo.
Yes.
Or, costs very little.
So you will, I think a pretty common play pattern will be turn 4, Yeheni's expertise, Liliana.
Oh man, that's just brutal.
That's
how can any aggro deck deal with -3, -3, and then something like the new Liliana? That just sounds nearly impossible to deal with.
It's pretty backbreaking, and the crazy thing with these cards is they also color fix. So you can totally go Yeheni's expertise into Aerial Responder, which I don't think that's a sequence you want to do necessarily, but because they color fix, it means that it can even get you out of situations. Like, it's not the worst thing in the world that as a backup plan you can use them to play things that your lands did not allow you to play. You can have sequences that just you can have a double white card that your mana base just didn't cooperate, and now you can play it, or a double green card, or you can I drew nothing but swamps or things that make black. Now I'm going to play this red-blue card after I've wiped the board.
Yeah, that's definitely an important aspect of these cards, and I don't know how frequently it'll come up, but any kind of options on cards that are as effective and efficient as these are, that's a lot of power. Specifically, I think the white one, the blue one, the black one, and maybe the red one. It's really hard for me to evaluate the red one.
I think all of them are playable. I think the thing is, the effect on these cards effectively costs 1 mana.
Yeah.
Whatever the effect is,
true.
It's effectively 1 mana. So if you would pay 1 mana for
1 mana and a card.
Yeah, 1 mana and a card. Would you play a 1 mana card that is Hordling Outburst? If you then got to play any 3-drop in your hand.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty absurd. It's a little bit less than that because you have to actually get to 4 mana, but almost every time that Wizards has messed around in the space of cheat on mana, it's been way more powerful than they might have intended.
Would you play a Hordling Outburst that gave you a free Black Lotus?
Yeah, I mean that's absurd.
Would you play that for 4 mana?
I certainly am very excited to play.
What if the Black Lotus could split its colors?
Great.
So I mean, there's one where Strom's expertise, the white one, I expect to go see a lot of Strom's expertise, Nissa. I expect to see a lot of that.
Yeah.
I expect to see with Rishkar's expertise, the green one. I expect to see a lot of Rishkar's expertise, Virtuous Gear Hulk.
Oh, jeez. Yeah.
That's probably, and you can always go Virtuous Gear Hulk, Rishkar's expertise, Virtuous Gear Hulk, which is gross. But all of these cards, I think the blue one is probably the weakest for the blue and the red are kind of borderline for me, but even they are really strong. Like, just having the ability to play a card for free is just so powerful. And the effects are generally effects that you want, which these are pushed cards, very, very pushed. There's also a cycle of legendaries that go along with the expertises. Of those, I think Beryl, the blue one, and Rishkar, the green one, are probably the most standard impactful. The white one, Srom, is also pretty solid, but I don't think I think he might just dirtle too much, drawing a bunch of cards that you don't necessarily need. Any other big cards that jumped out at you, Devin or Billy? I mean, Paradox Engine is one that I'm going to definitely be playing with.
Yeah, I'm definitely curious to see if Paradox Engine ends up being silly.
I have a couple that I looked at and said I'm just really glad these cards are back in standard, because they don't seem to be, they're not that good. When I mention them, you're gonna say, okay, great, but I'm really happy that Negate is back in standard, Shock is in standard, and Druid of the Cow is in standard, because those I think were just like really solid staple cards that made a lot of decks just work, and they're like either common or uncommon, so they're going to be really nice to pick up copies of them in draft. I think that we were missing, or at least I was sorely missing, a card like Negate. I think that all the cheap like red removal was kind of missing. We always had to pay two or three red mana for the good removal, and Shock's not great, but I'm happy that it's back. And then having just a very vanilla mana dork in green is very familiar and nice to have back.
Yeah, and a defensive mana dork.
Yeah, because I think it's a 1/2.
It's a 1/3.
Oh, even better. Big booty mana.
Some cards that jumped out at me. I don't know how good the card is. I really haven't thought about its goodness, but I just love everything about Greenbelt Rampager. It's just perfect. It's really just doing nothing wrong.
It's just a 3/4. It's real big.
Yeah, it's a 1 mana 3/4, and it says you have to pay 2 energy when it comes into play, and if you can't, it gives you 1 energy. So it could be a 3 mana 3/4, because you pay 1 green, get an energy, pay another green, get another energy, and then you pay it the third time, and then you have to use those 2 energy and get a 3/4. Not a great play pattern, but maybe you can fit in that 1 mana and into curves that were kind of weird, but maybe you can get them energy early on. I don't really know if this card is the strongest. I just like what it's doing. I think it's doing cool things. Yeah. I also, every time they play a card that resembles Dark Confidant, we always have to look at it. Glint Sleeve Siphoner is a 2 mana 2/1 menace. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, you get 1 energy. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may pay 2 energy. If you do, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. I don't know how good that is, but I mean, in an aggressive black deck, if that deck exists, it'd be hard for me to see this card not at least being experimented with.
Yeah, I mean, it deserves experimentation. I've bought in too many times on the black 2-drop aggressive creature. Too many times. They had something of truths, the black.
Yeah, there's been a lot.
Inspired card that when it untapped, you drew a card and lost a life. I was like, oh wow, it's not the converted mana cost. Wow, it's like a confidant sort of. Nope, that thing never survived. The Asylum Visitor. Oh, if I can just get rid of my cards or my opponent's cards, I get to draw extra cards. Nope. This one, I hope it works out. I hope this is the one. But man, I've just been burned so many times.
There is a 5 mana Consulate Crackdown. For 5 mana, 2 of which are white. It's an enchantment that when it enters the battlefield, you exile all artifacts your opponents control until it leaves the battlefield. That is a pretty important safety valve for an artifact deck. It's also really cool and important that it doesn't exile your artifacts. It just exiles your opponent's artifacts, so you can play it in your own artifact-related deck.
Now, remind me, what did Fumigate do as well?
It destroys all creatures.
All creatures. Did we have an artifact board wipe in Aether Revolt?
Nope.
In Kaladesh.
Oh, sorry, yeah, in Kaladesh.
No, we didn't.
So here it seems like we have basically like a D-sphere, but for artifacts, because it's once it leaves the battlefield, they drop back into play. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it is a one-sided.
How do you feel about it being 5 mana? Because I feel like for 5 mana, and normally if you're paying 5 mana for something, you're wiping the board, and it doesn't come back if it leaves. Like, why wouldn't they just print a 5 mana destroy all artifacts type card?
I think this is just so that they are not printing the true hoser that they've printed in other artifact sets that just kind of keep the artifact synergies down to the point where, like, someone just puts this card in the sideboard and it just shuts down all the parties, regardless of what artifact synergies they were playing. It's just all shut down. This card really only interferes with some of the more expensive artifact combos because it is itself expensive. If someone's doing stuff with aggressive small artifacts, they'll probably still get underneath it and do what they need to do. So I think it's just it is designed to stop some of the degenerate big combos instead of shutting down everything.
I also just want to highlight Caught in the Brights. I just want to make sure people know that this card exists.
It's an amazing card. It's a gremlin in the crosshairs of a car, just like a deer in the headlights. And then if the creature can't attack or block. And then if you attack that player with a vehicle, that creature that was caught in the brights gets exiled, which is amazing. It's the best. You accidentally hit the thing with your car, and it dies. It's the best. It's the most flavorful card I've seen in a very long time. It's amazing. Not since Pongify have I seen a removal spell I was more into.
It is interesting that never mind.
Just one card that I just want to highlight real quick that is not degenerate like a deck that I'm building, but a card that I think is super powerful, and in the coming standard, I hope it finds a home. Hope of Ghirapur. It's a 1-mana, 1/1 legendary Thopter that you can sacrifice it, and then until your next turn, target player who is dealt combat damage by Hope of Ghirapur this turn cannot cast non-creature spells. If we say, for example, lived in a standard where combo decks were passing like ships in the night and just trying desperately to combo out before their opponent, Hope of Ghirapur would be a pretty good way to get cover for your combo.
My concern about Hope of Ghirapur is that, especially in Eternal formats, sometimes just taking one turn away from a combo deck can be all you need. And that really can. There is like an essential turn that deck is hoping to combo off. I guess I'm worried that Hope of Ghirapur is a 1-mana, 1/1 flyer, and it doesn't contribute a lot, and it has to kill itself to do the one thing that it's supposed to do. If you're in a deck if you're in any kind of deck that isn't presenting a very scary clock for your opponent's combo deck, just delaying them by one turn is not going to stop this. And especially in a format like Standard, even most combo decks are playing creatures. This spell does nothing at all if your opponent can play a creature.
That's not.
Because it only stops non-creature spells.
That's not what I'm saying. If I was, say, for example, playing Saheeli and the Cat, I might run this Thopter in my deck so that the turn I want to play the combo, they can't stop it with counterspells or removal. Because
I guess that's a good point.
As soon as I run this out there, they have to spend time and mana answering my 1/1 flyer. Otherwise, I will have free reign to combo out. And so this card, I think, is whatever combo deck if you're making a combo deck, this might want to be in your sideboard just as a way to ensure that your combo can happen. It doesn't deal with everything that stops, like the Saheeli combo, but it stops a lot of the conventional ways to do it. So I expect it to see a fair amount of play. I would think, like, that's a good way to disrupt a lot of intelligent ways to stop a degenerate combo. So with that, I think we have reached the end of Aether Revolt. Any impressions, final impressions? I'm super excited. I think this is going to be a very fun standard. I anticipate that Healy and the Cat part of that will probably get banned before the end of their lives in Standard. I would anticipate one of them to probably get banned, but if it doesn't, great. I mean, it seems like it's not as degenerate because most of the things don't have flash, so they leave some pretty big windows to disrupt them, but we'll see. They do have a 1-mana counterspell that basically counters counterspells, so we'll see.
Yeah, I see a lot of cards that jump off the page. I mean, Fatal Push is crazy. Maybe not in standard, but in other formats, I feel like you can do really cool things with Baral, Chief of Compliance. I feel like all the expertise cards are really cool. I'm really excited to see what you can do with them. There's a lot of cards in this set that make me excited, and I want to see, in maybe a year from now, which of these cards ended up being the ones that didn't just jump off the page, but actually gave results.
Billy, any last thoughts?
Um, I don't know. So I've taken a pretty lengthy break from playing Magic, and then at this point, I really only play during, like pre-release events or limited events. I don't build constructed. I don't play modern. I don't participate in much Magic outside of like fun new pre-releases. I was really excited to play in Kaladesh. It seemed really, really fun, super cool. I liked the idea of there being a very culturally rich, artifact-based world. I think they added some really cool stuff with Aether Revolt, but I don't think it's actually going to be enough to pull me back into the game. Like when I played Aether Revolt, when I played in Kaladesh, I saw like, oh, there's energy, oh, there's crew, oh, there's fabricate. There's like really cool stuff, and yeah, fabricate ended up being kind of underwhelming, but I think vehicles with crew and energy was like, wow, like I want to go play Magic and see what that feels like. Revolt and Improvise aren't really drawing me in as much, so I might just pass on the MTG round this time, not because I don't like Magic anymore, but because maybe I'm feeling a little bit. They did a lot of really cool stuff for Kaladesh, and now I'm saying, okay, great, it's just more Magic.
That's fair. And for me, the big thing is whenever I'm designing decks, whenever I think of Modern or something like that, and I want to take a crack at designing a new deck, there are a few sets that I always look at because they're insane, and they give you a lot of room. And when I say insane, I don't mean insanely powerful. I mean they have insane cards that shouldn't exist and are really unique and do weird things. And that is Original Mirrodin, the whole Original Mirrodin block, and the Time Spiral block. Those two blocks are the blocks that, if I want to find a weird interaction that seems like it shouldn't exist in Magic, I will look at those sets and find weird cards to build around, generally speaking. I think Aether Revolt and Kaladesh are going to be one of the blocks that I really look to going forward, because there are just so many cool one-off cards that can inspire an entire deck or several decks, depending on how you want to play them. And luckily, they're all artifacts for the most part. Though there are some non-artifact build-arounds that we haven't really touched on, but this set is powerful. It's got a lot of powerful single cards that you don't need to build around anything, and they're just good. And then it's got build-arounds that you can really spend a lot of time investing in. I mean, heck, I spent a not inconsequential amount of time building a deck using Peace of Mind and Gear per Orrery as a combo. That's a bad combo, but it's something that you can do, and it's fun. So, thank you, Devin. Thank you, Billy, for talking with me and indulging my love of this game. And hopefully Aether Revolt is good to everyone. Till next time. Peace!